The wind blew softly across the dry land as the group walked under a silent, moonless sky. Dust clung to their faces and clothes, and every step felt heavier than the last. They had been walking for days, some said weeks, but no one was counting anymore. The only thing that mattered was reaching the border before sunrise. They carried little. A few bottles of water, some dry bread, and the small hopes they kept buried deep in their hearts. Their shoes were torn, their feet swollen, but no one complained. Complaints didn't change anything. The only sound was the slow shuffle of tired steps and the occasional cry of a child being hushed by its mother. The leader of the group, a quiet young man with tired eyes, walked ahead. He wasn't much older than the others, but he carried himself like someone who had already lived several lives. In his hand, he held a folded photograph, an old picture of his mother standing in front of their small house, smiling as if she knew everything would one day be okay. That photo gave him strength when his legs refused to move. The others followed his pace. Among them was an older woman, her face lined with exhaustion but her spirit still strong. She carried a small bag close to her chest as though it held her entire life. Behind her walked a couple with a small boy who was barely 7. The boy clutched a small wooden toy in his hand, a gift from his father before they left home. Every time he stumbled, he looked at that toy and held it tighter. They had all left behind something: homes, friends, graves, memories that hurt too much to carry. The border was not just a line between two countries. For them, it was a line between pain and hope, between what was lost and what could still be found. As they reached the edge of a dry valley, the leader stopped and raised his hand. The group froze instantly. Ahead, faint lights shimmered in the distance, small, trembling dots like stars that had fallen to the earth. Those lights belonged to the world they had dreamed of reaching, the land that promised safety, work, and peace. For a moment, everyone stared in silence. Someone whispered a prayer. Another kissed a charm tied around their wrist. The air felt heavy with emotion, fear mixed with hope, exhaustion tangled with courage. The leader crouched down and studied the ground. The sand was hard and cracked, and a few meters ahead the fence rose like a black scar under the night sky. It wasn't tall, but it was enough to remind them that they weren't supposed to cross. On the other side, everything was unknown. He turned back to the group. "We go one by one," he said in a low voice. "Stay quiet." No lights, no sound, they nodded. No one argued. The night was too still, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. The first man crawled under the fence, dragging his small bag behind him. Then another followed. The woman with the child went next. The boy trembled but kept silent as his mother gently pushed him through. The leader went last, holding the fence open for the old woman until she made it safely across. When he finally stepped over, he felt his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. They had crossed. For a long moment, everyone just stood there, breathing hard, staring around at the land that stretched before them. It was strange: flat fields, scattered trees, and a distant line of dark hills. Nothing seemed dangerous, yet the air felt different. It wasn't the kind of peace they expected. It was too quiet: no animals, no insects, no wind. The silence pressed against their ears. Even the leaves on the trees didn't move. The leader frowned. "We move quickly," he whispered. "We find a place to rest before sunrise." They started walking again, deeper into the foreign land. Each step felt heavier, like the ground was resisting them. The boy stumbled, and his father lifted him onto his shoulders. The old woman whispered a prayer under her breath, though no one could hear the words. After an hour, they reached what looked like an abandoned village. A few small houses stood at the edge of a field, their doors half open, windows broken. It looked as if people had left in a hurry. One house still had a chair lying on its side near the doorway. Another had a plate on a table covered in dust. The woman with the child looked around nervously. "Maybe they moved away," she said. "It looks safe enough to rest." The leader hesitated. He didn't like the way the shadows fell between the buildings. Still, everyone was too tired to go farther. "All right," he said finally. "We'll rest here, just until morning." They entered one of the houses. The floor creaked under their feet, and the air smelled faintly of metal, like rust or old blood. A cold breeze slipped through a broken window, but no one cared. They sat down on the floor, leaning against the walls, grateful to be off their feet. Someone shared the last piece of bread. Someone else passed around a small bottle of water. The child fell asleep on his mother's lap, clutching his toy. The leader stayed awake, staring through the doorway at the empty street outside. The moon had finally come out, faint and pale, casting long shadows that moved as if alive. He thought he saw something, a flicker of movement near the far end of the road. He squinted, but it was gone, probably just his tired eyes playing tricks. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Later that night, a soft noise broke the silence. It sounded like metal scraping against stone, slow and steady. The leader rose quietly, careful not to wake the others. He stepped outside, the cold air biting his skin. The sound stopped. The street lay empty, the fields beyond dark and still. He stood there for a minute, scanning the area. Then he turned to go back inside. As he did, he noticed something strange. Footprints near the doorway. They weren't theirs. The prints were fresh, pressed deep into the dry earth. Human-like, but not quite right. The toes seemed too long, the arches oddly bent, as if whoever made them had walked barefoot on broken stones for years. He crouched to look closer, his breath caught in his throat. The prints led toward the back of the house, then disappeared into the shadows. For a long moment, he didn't move. He could feel his heartbeat in his ears. Then slowly he went back inside and locked the door as quietly as he could. When morning came, the others woke up feeling uneasy. The sky was pale and cold, and the silence outside was the same as before. The leader didn't mention the footprints. He didn't want to scare anyone, not yet. They gathered their things and prepared to leave. The old woman looked around the empty house and shivered. "This place feels sad," she said softly. "Like it remembers something it wants us to forget." No one replied. As they stepped outside, the boy pointed toward the field. "Look," he said, his voice small. They turned to see what he was pointing at. Far beyond the trees, a single figure stood watching them. Too far to see clearly, too still to be a living person, or maybe too alive to be anything else. The figure didn't move. It just stood there facing them. The leader blinked and it was gone. He told everyone it was just the light, a shadow, nothing more. But the unease in his chest grew heavier. He had crossed many dangerous lands before, but none had ever felt like this. So quiet, so empty, yet so aware. They kept walking, leaving the village behind, but the feeling followed them like a shadow that refused to fall away. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last. Though no one spoke of it, the border was behind them now, far out of sight. But something about this new land didn't feel human at all. The boy asked his father, "Are we safe now?" The man smiled weakly. "Yes, we are," he said, though his eyes didn't match his voice. The leader looked back one last time. The wind had started again, gentle but strange, carrying a low hum that sounded almost like whispers. He turned away, pretending not to hear. Their new life had begun, but the land they had entered seemed to breathe quietly, waiting, as if it had been expecting them all along. Morning came slowly, but it did not bring peace. The air was still heavy, and the silence was the same as before, thick and strange, like the world was holding its breath. The group stood in a circle near the edge of the abandoned village, deciding which way to go next. No one wanted to stay there any longer. The leader looked at the far-off hills and said quietly, "We'll move east. There should be a town somewhere near the river." Everyone agreed. The boy's mother wrapped her shawl tighter around him, and the old woman held her bag close. No one said it out loud, but they all felt something was wrong with this place. The emptiness was too perfect, too silent, too still. They started walking again, their footsteps soft on the dry ground. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, but the warmth didn't feel comforting. It felt sharp, almost like it was watching them. The group moved past broken fences, dry wells, and the remains of fields where nothing had grown for years. Everywhere they looked, it seemed people had left in a hurry. A door creaked open in the wind. A half-burnt candle stood on a windowsill, melted into a strange shape. The boy asked his mother, "Where did everyone go?" His mother brushed his hair gently. "Maybe they found a better place," she said softly, though her voice didn't sound certain. By noon, they reached a narrow dirt road that stretched far into the distance. A few old signs stood there, words faded by time. The leader brushed the dust off one and squinted. The letters were barely visible, but one word still showed clearly: "Welcome." He stared at it for a moment, then turned to the others. "Let's go," he said. They walked along the road for hours, but they didn't see a single person. No cars, no birds, not even a stray dog. It was as if life itself had vanished from this part of the world. At one point, they found a small shop by the roadside. The door was unlocked. Inside, shelves were still stacked with goods. Old tins, packets of food long expired, bottles coated with dust. It looked as if someone had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. The group entered carefully. The air smelled of stale air and metal. The old woman opened a packet of dry biscuits, sniffed it, and shook her head. "Too old," she said. The boy wandered toward the counter. There was a notebook lying there, open to a page filled with hurried handwriting. He couldn't read it all, but he recognized some words. Gone. Night. They came. He tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed. She frowned but didn't want to scare him. "Leave it," she whispered. "Let's not touch anything." Outside, the leader filled a bottle with water from a rusty tap near the side of the shop. The water came out cloudy at first, then clear. He took a sip and winced. It tasted strange, like metal. Still, it was water, and they needed it. They rested for a while under a tree. The air was dry and hot, and sweat trickled down their faces. The leader kept his eyes on the road ahead. Something about the land made him uneasy. It wasn't just the emptiness, it was the feeling that they were being watched, not by people but by the land itself. When they started walking again, the wind picked up. The dry grass swayed gently, whispering against their legs. Then, from somewhere far off, a faint sound reached them. It was low and slow, like metal dragging against stone. The old woman stopped and looked around. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Everyone froze. The sound came again, closer this time. Then it stopped. The leader scanned the horizon but saw nothing. "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice wasn't steady. They kept walking faster now. As evening fell, they found another set of houses, smaller, older, half covered in weeds. Smoke stains marked one of the walls, and a few broken chairs lay scattered outside. It looked like another village, but emptier than the first. The boy pointed toward one of the houses. "Look, someone's there," he whispered. The leader followed his gaze, and for a moment he saw what looked like a figure moving behind a curtain. He took a step forward, but when he looked again, there was nothing, just the curtain gently swaying. He didn't want to scare the others. "We'll stay here tonight," he said. "We need rest." They entered a small house at the edge of the street. It was cleaner than the others, though still covered in dust. The old woman found some old blankets and spread them on the floor. The boy's mother lit a candle she carried from before. The small flame flickered softly, casting warm light across the walls. For the first time in days, it almost felt peaceful. They sat together, sharing stories in low voices. The old woman spoke about her home, about how she used to sit under a big tree every evening watching her grandchildren play. Her voice was calm, and for a while everyone forgot the strange silence outside. Then suddenly they heard something, 3 soft knocks on the door. Everyone froze. The leader stood slowly. "Who's there?" he called out. No answer. He waited a few seconds, then stepped closer to the door. The candle flickered. The knocking came again, this time from the window. The boy's mother pulled him close. The old woman whispered a prayer. The leader opened the door quickly, hoping to catch whoever was outside. There was no one. The street was empty, the air completely still. Then he noticed something on the ground near the doorstep. Marks. They weren't footprints this time, more like handprints pressed deep into the dust. 5 fingers, long and thin, stretched in unnatural shapes. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He turned around and closed the door tightly. "It's nothing," he said softly, forcing a smile. "Maybe animals." No one believed him, but they didn't argue. That night, no one really slept. Every creak of the house made them sit up. The wind outside had changed. It sounded like whispers, rising and falling softly, though no words could be understood. When the first light of morning touched the walls, the group began packing again. They wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. Before leaving, the leader walked around the house one last time, checking the ground. The handprints were still there, but they looked different now, stretched farther apart, as if something had crawled away in the night. He didn't tell anyone. They walked for hours that day, the air growing colder even though the sun was shining. The land began to change, taller trees, thicker grass, and the faint sound of water somewhere ahead. When they finally reached the river, they dropped their bags and sat by the edge, drinking and washing their faces. The cold water felt good against their skin. For a while they even laughed, a small nervous laugh that felt like a relief. The boy skipped small stones across the river, counting each bounce. His mother smiled faintly. The old woman sat nearby looking at the reflection of the sky. "Maybe it's over," she said quietly. "Maybe we're safe now." The leader looked around. The trees on the other side of the river were dense and dark. A small wooden bridge stretched across the water, leading into the shadows. He didn't trust the look of it, but they couldn't stay here forever. "We'll cross before sunset," he said. "Then we'll rest on the other side." They began to gather their things, but before they could move, the boy looked up suddenly. "Someone's on the bridge," he whispered. They turned to look. A figure stood in the middle of the bridge, still and silent. It was hard to see its face from that distance, but it looked tall, thin and strangely bent, as if its body didn't fit right inside its skin. The leader stared, unable to move. "Hello?" he called out. The figure didn't answer. It tilted its head slightly, then stepped backward and disappeared into the trees. The boy hid his face against his mother. The old woman crossed herself quietly. The leader waited for a moment, then said, "We'll wait until morning." That night they stayed by the river, keeping a small fire burning to feel less alone. The flames danced gently, lighting up their tired faces. No one spoke of what they had seen. The land across the bridge lay dark and quiet, waiting as if it already knew they would come. And deep in that darkness, something moved, slowly, patiently, like it had been waiting for them all along. The fire crackled softly that night beside the river. Its warm glow touched the faces of the travelers, drawing small shadows that danced behind them. Nobody said a word. The silence was too deep, too heavy, like a blanket pressing down on them. The boy's mother held him close while the old woman stared into the flames, her lips moving in quiet prayer. The leader sat a little apart from the group, looking across the dark river. The wooden bridge stood quiet under the moonlight. The figure they had seen earlier hadn't returned, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. It hadn't walked like a normal person. Something about the way it moved, slow, twisted, had unsettled him. He kept telling himself it could have been an illusion. Shadows could play tricks when one was tired. Still he stayed awake, keeping watch. The night dragged on. The others slept lightly, waking at every sound. Once the wind picked up, brushing through the trees like a whisper. Then came a faint splash from the water. The leader turned his head sharply, scanning the river, but saw nothing except ripples glinting under the moon. He tried to calm himself. "It's just fish," he whispered. When dawn came, everyone was too tired to move. Their eyes were red, their bodies aching. Yet the moment the sun touched the bridge, the leader stood up. "We move now," he said. "The longer we stay here, the harder it gets." They packed their few things quickly and began crossing the bridge one by one. The wood groaned under their weight, and the sound echoed softly over the water. The boy gripped his mother's hand tightly. Halfway across, he stopped. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. They all paused. A faint tapping sound came from below the bridge, like something striking the wood from underneath. The leader looked over the side, but the water was calm. "Keep walking," he said firmly. "Don't stop." They reached the other side safely. The trees there were taller, their branches thick, blocking most of the sunlight. The air felt colder, heavier. The path ahead wound through the forest like a tunnel. The old woman glanced back once at the river. "It looks so peaceful from here," she said softly, "but I don't trust that silence." The leader didn't answer. He led the way, his eyes sharp. Every now and then he thought he heard faint footsteps behind them, but when he turned, no one was there. By afternoon, they reached a small clearing. In the center stood a single house, old but still standing, its roof half collapsed, the walls covered in moss. Smoke curled weakly from its chimney. The boy pointed. "Someone lives there," he said. For a moment, hope flickered through the group. Maybe they would finally find help, food, water, a place to rest without fear. The leader hesitated, then nodded. "Let's see who it is." They approached slowly. As they neared the door, it creaked open before they could knock. An old man stood there, thin and bent, his eyes sunken deep into his wrinkled face. He looked surprised to see them. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a rough voice. The leader took a step forward. "We mean no harm. We crossed the border. We're just looking for a place to rest for a while." The old man stared at him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in if you must." Inside, the house smelled of smoke and herbs. The room was small, cluttered with old furniture and jars filled with dried leaves. A single candle burned on a table. The man motioned for them to sit. "Not many come this way anymore," he said quietly. "Those who do rarely stay long." The old woman frowned. "Why is that? What happened to this place?" The man didn't answer right away. He poured some water into a small cup and handed it to her. His hands trembled slightly. "This land," he began slowly, "used to belong to people who were forced to leave long ago. The ground remembers things that men try to forget. When they left, they took their lives with them, but their memories stayed. That's why the wind sounds the way it does here. It carries what was left behind." The leader looked around the small room. "We've seen strange things," he said carefully. "Empty villages, footprints, a figure on the bridge." The old man's eyes darkened. "You've seen what this land shows to those who don't belong?" The boy's mother looked uneasy. "Are you saying the land isn't alive?" The man shook his head slowly. "Not alive. Just restless?" He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "When outsiders cross over, it remembers the pain of those who were driven out. Sometimes it welcomes them. Sometimes it doesn't." Silence filled the room. The candle flame flickered, bending toward the window as if drawn by the wind. The leader frowned. "We just want to move on. We don't mean to disturb anyone." The man nodded slowly. "Then leave before nightfall. Stay here too long, and the land will find ways to make you part of it." The boy shivered and clung to his mother. She rubbed his back and whispered, "It's all right." Before they left, the old woman offered the man a piece of bread from her bag. He accepted it with a trembling smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "Travel carefully." They stepped back into the forest. The sun was already dipping low, painting the trees with long shadows. They walked faster now, trying to make it out before dark. After some time, the boy's mother stopped suddenly. "Where's the young man who carried the bag?" she asked. Everyone turned. He was gone. They called his name again and again, their voices echoing through the trees, but there was no reply. His bag lay near a fallen branch, torn open. The contents, clothes, a small tin of food, a half-empty bottle, were scattered on the ground. The leader picked up the bottle. "It's still cold," he said. "He was here just a few minutes ago." The old woman clutched her scarf. "We must find him before it gets dark." They split up, staying close but searching the surrounding area. The forest grew thicker as the light faded. Branches scraped against their arms and dry leaves crunched under their feet. The boy stumbled and his mother lifted him into her arms. Then, from somewhere deep among the trees came a faint sound. It was like knocking, slow and steady. The leader followed the sound cautiously. The others trailed behind. The knocking stopped, then started again. Softer this time, like it was moving away. They followed it to a small clearing where an old well stood, covered in moss. The sound seemed to come from inside it. The leader peered into the darkness. "Hello?" he called. Only silence answered. He tied a small rock to the end of a rope and dropped it down. The rope went deep, too deep for a normal well. When it finally hit something, the sound that came back was dull, like a thud against soft earth. He pulled the rope back up quickly. There was nothing on it, but it was wet, cold and sticky, as if it had touched something alive. The old woman whispered, "We should go. Now." No one argued. They hurried back toward the path. The forest seemed different now, the air thicker, the trees closer together. Every sound felt louder, the rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig, even their own breathing. When they finally reached the open field, the sun was gone. The sky turned gray and a pale light shimmered through the clouds. The boy's mother looked behind her one last time. Through the trees, she thought she saw movement, a shape, bent and slow, following them at a distance. She blinked and it was gone. They didn't stop to check. By the time they found another place to rest, night had fallen. They took shelter in an old barn at the edge of the woods. The walls creaked, and the air smelled of dust and hay. The leader sat near the door, staring into the dark fields outside. The others lay close together, whispering prayers, hoping the missing man would return. Hours passed. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. Then came a new sound, soft, rhythmic, almost like someone walking slowly around the barn. The boy's mother held her breath. The leader gripped a piece of wood tightly, ready to defend them. The sound stopped. Then, just before dawn, the door creaked open slightly on its own. and a cold wind swept through the barn. No one slept after that. When morning came, they stepped outside. The grass was damp, and near the barn door, clear footprints marked the ground, bare, human-like, but twisted and uneven, leading back toward the forest. The leader looked at them silently. The others waited for him to speak. Finally, he said in a low voice, "We keep moving. Whatever this place is, it wants us to stay. We can't let it." The group began walking again, their hearts heavy with fear and loss. The missing man was gone, and the silence of the land seemed to grow deeper with every step. Behind them, the footprints near the barn slowly faded into the earth, as if the land was swallowing them whole. The night was cold, heavy with silence, and the air felt thick with tension. Deep in the forest near the border, the small group of wanderers sat huddled around a weak fire. Their faces were drawn, their eyes fixed on the dancing flames as if the light could protect them from what lay beyond. They had crossed into human land 2 days ago, something no one from their side had done in generations. And now every sound in the darkness made their hearts race. Their leader, an older man with sharp eyes and quiet authority, kept checking the surroundings. His expression was calm, but inside he was battling fear. He knew they had taken a risk greater than anyone could imagine. The old tales were clear. Humans didn't welcome strangers from the other side. Yet desperation had forced them to come. Their home had been dying, the rivers drying up, the soil turning gray. They had no choice but to look for help, or at least hope, across the forbidden border. The youngest of the group, a boy barely out of his teenage years, kept asking questions. He wanted to know why the humans hated them so much, why the two worlds couldn't live side by side. The leader didn't have an answer. All he knew was that both sides carried wounds from the past, wounds deep enough to make peace feel like a dream. He only said, "Sometimes fear becomes stronger than truth." They planned to travel through the forest quietly and reach a small human village by dawn. It was said that some people there were kind, that they might listen. But as the night dragged on, strange noises echoed through the woods, soft movements like someone watching them. The older woman in the group whispered that they should leave the fire and move before it was too late. The leader hesitated. The fire was their only comfort, but staying might draw attention. Before he could decide, a branch snapped nearby. Everyone froze. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then came footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling them like a predator testing its prey. The boy grabbed a stick from the fire, holding it as a torch. The flames flickered on his frightened face. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind the trees. The leader signaled everyone to stay quiet, his hand trembling slightly. Then a figure stepped into the light. It was a man, human, tall, carrying a rifle. His clothes were worn, his face covered with dirt and stubble. He looked as startled as they were, though his finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, no one spoke. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between them. The leader stood slowly, his palms raised to show he meant no harm. "We don't want trouble," he said carefully. The man's eyes narrowed. He had seen people from across the border before, once long ago, and it hadn't ended well. His voice was hard. "You shouldn't be here. Go back before the others find you." That word, others, made everyone tense. The leader tried to reason, explaining they needed help, not conflict. But the man shook his head. "You don't understand," he said. "The people here, they don't forgive easily. If they see you, they'll think you've come to take something." Before the leader could reply, the man turned his head suddenly, listening. From the distance came the sound of barking dogs. More humans were coming, and fast. The man cursed under his breath. "You have to move," he said sharply. "Follow the river north. There's an old mill. Hide there until sunrise." The group hesitated. Could they trust him? The boy looked at the leader, his eyes full of doubt. But the sound of dogs grew louder, and there was no time to debate. They grabbed what little they had and ran through the forest, following the faint glimmer of the river through the dark. The leader turned back once and saw the man watching them before disappearing into the shadows. They ran until their legs burned. The forest seemed endless, branches scratching their faces, roots tripping their feet. The dogs were closer now. They could hear the shouts of men calling out. The older woman stumbled, falling into the mud, but the others helped her up. Fear gave them strength. Finally, they saw it. A broken structure near the riverbank, half covered by moss and vines. The old mill. They pushed through the creaking door and hid inside. Dust filled the air, and the sound of rushing water outside masked their breathing. They sat close together, gasping for air, trying to stay quiet. The boy looked through a crack in the wall and saw flashlights sweeping through the trees. "They're here," he whispered. The leader put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "Stay calm," he said. They waited in silence as footsteps approached. Voices carried through the wind, angry, determined, and searching. One of the men shouted something about border thieves. Another cursed about the creatures crossing again. The words stung. The group knew what humans thought of them. Less than people, more like shadows from old tales meant to scare children. Minutes felt like hours. The leader's heart pounded in his chest as one of the men came so close that his shadow fell across the door. Then, as suddenly as they had come, the voices began to fade. The dogs barked in the distance, moving away. The group didn't move until the forest fell silent again. When dawn finally came, the pale light filtered through the cracks in the wall. The boy leaned against the cold wood, exhausted but alive. The older woman cried quietly, her tears mixing with the dirt on her face. They had escaped, but only barely. The leader sat by the doorway, watching the sun rise over the trees. He knew this was only the beginning. They couldn't go back now. The moment they crossed that invisible line, their lives had changed forever. Behind them was home, dying, fading into dust. Ahead of them was a world that saw them as invaders. They had to move carefully, hide their faces, and hope that somewhere among these humans there were still hearts that remembered kindness. The boy broke the silence. "Do you think that man helped us because he cared?" The leader thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not," he said softly. "Maybe he just remembered what it feels like to be hunted." Outside, the world was waking up. The river shimmered in the early light, carrying both danger and promise. They didn't know what waited beyond the trees, only that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And somewhere in the same forest, a man stood watching the rising smoke from their fire, wondering if he had just saved lives or started something much bigger than he could imagine. The morning after their escape was quiet, almost too quiet. The old mill stood still beside the river, its walls leaning like tired bones of a long-forgotten time. The group inside had barely slept. Their eyes were red, faces pale, but relief, thin and fragile, still lingered in the air. For now, they were safe. The barking dogs and shouts had faded into the night, leaving only the sound of running water and wind moving through the broken roof. The leader sat near the doorway, his back against the wood. He watched the light grow stronger over the forest. It was strange, he thought, how peaceful the world looked when your heart was full of fear. The river shimmered like glass, the birds began to sing, and for a moment everything felt normal. Yet he knew the truth. Nothing would be normal again. Once you cross into forbidden land, even sunlight feels suspicious. The younger boy, tired but curious as always, picked up a stone and threw it into the river. "Do you think they'll come back for us?" he asked quietly. The leader didn't answer right away. His mind was heavy with thoughts. He had led them this far, but each step forward felt like walking on ice. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. The older woman joined them, holding a torn piece of cloth she had found in the mill. She began cleaning the boy's scratched hands with the river water. Her touch was gentle, but her face showed worry. "We can't stay here long," she said. "They'll start searching again when they find our tracks near the fire." The leader nodded. "We'll move before noon. There's a village north from here, maybe 2 days away. If we stay close to the river, we can find it." The plan was simple, but hope was thin. They had no food, no proper shelter, and no idea how the humans would react if they were discovered. The memory of the man who had warned them still played in their minds. He had told them to run, and they did, but he hadn't said what waited beyond the forest. They gathered their few belongings, a torn map, a blanket, and a small bag with dried herbs. Before leaving, the leader took a last look at the mill. Something about it felt symbolic, like a memory of safety that wasn't meant to last. Then they started walking again, the forest stretching endlessly ahead. Hours passed. The sun rose high and hot, burning their faces. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Sometimes they could hear distant sounds, axes cutting wood, wheels creaking, but they stayed hidden. The leader's instincts told him that eyes might be watching. Every snapped twig made them stop. Every bird cry felt like a warning. By afternoon, they reached an open meadow. The river curved wide here, and in the distance, faint smoke rose from chimneys. A human village. The boy's eyes lit up with both fear and excitement. "Should we go?" he asked. The older woman grabbed his arm quickly. "We can't just walk in," she whispered. "They'll see us. They'll know we're not from here." The leader crouched low, scanning the area. He could see people working in the fields, farmers with tools, women carrying baskets, children chasing each other. They looked ordinary, peaceful. It was hard to believe these same people might turn violent if they learned who stood among the trees watching them. Still, they needed help. They couldn't survive hiding forever. The leader decided to take a risk. "We'll wait till night," he said. "Then I'll go alone. Maybe someone there will listen." The group didn't like the idea, but there was no other choice. When darkness came, the leader wrapped himself in a dark cloak and began moving toward the village. His steps were slow and quiet. The air was cold again, the kind that seeps into your bones. As he got closer, he saw lights glowing through windows, laughter drifting through the night. He walked past a small house where an old man sat outside carving wood. The leader hesitated, then decided this was the moment. He approached carefully. The old man looked up, surprised. "You're out late," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Lost your way?" The leader's heart pounded. He nodded. "Something like that," he said softly. "I'm looking for food, or a place to rest." The old man studied him for a long time. His eyes were sharp, full of quiet understanding. "You're not from here," he said finally. The words were not a question. The leader didn't lie. "No," he said. "But I mean no harm. We've traveled far and we have nothing left." The man sighed. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, echoing the same warning the other human had given before. "If people find out, they'll cause trouble for both of us." Still, after a moment, the man stood and motioned toward his small shed. "There's a loaf of bread in there. Take it and go before the dogs start barking." The leader's throat tightened. He wanted to thank him, but words felt too small. He took the bread, nodded once, and stepped back into the shadows. As he left, he heard the man whisper something, too soft to catch, but it sounded almost like a prayer. When he returned to the group, they were waiting anxiously. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of food. They tore small pieces, eating slowly, sharing every crumb. It wasn't much, but it gave them strength and hope. For a few minutes, they smiled. That night, under the stars, the leader couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the man's face in his mind, the mixture of fear and pity. It reminded him that not all humans were cruel, yet even kindness came with caution. The border between hate and compassion was thin, fragile like a thread stretched too tight. The next day, the journey grew harder. The forest thinned and open fields offered little cover. They moved only when the path was clear. Once they saw a patrol in the distance, men on horseback carrying torches. They dropped to the ground, holding their breath as the riders passed by. The boy whispered, "They're hunting us." The leader didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said it all. By evening, rain began to fall. Cold drops soaked their clothes and turned the path into mud. They took shelter beneath a rocky ledge. The older woman's voice trembled as she spoke. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said. "Maybe we were never meant to cross." The leader looked at her, his face tired but firm. "If we hadn't crossed, we'd already be gone. At least here we have a chance." The rain fell harder. The sound drowned their words, wrapping them in a cocoon of gray noise. The boy leaned against the rock, watching the lightning flash across the sky. He thought about home, the hills, the old trees, the laughter that once filled the air. Everything had changed so quickly. Now they were strangers in a world that didn't want them. Later that night, when the rain finally stopped, they saw light moving in the distance again. Lanterns, perhaps torches. The leader's body tensed. "They're searching again," he whispered. They packed their things and began to move, but the ground was slippery and the forest was dark. Every step felt dangerous. Then through the trees they saw figures, humans, only a few 100 feet away. Voices carried through the air. "We saw them near the river," one shouted. "Don't let them escape this time." Panic rushed through the group. The boy's breath came fast. "What do we do?" The leader's voice was calm but urgent. "Run toward the cliffs. If we reach the rocks, we can hide in the caves." They ran through the mud, hearts racing, slipping, stumbling, but never stopping. The sound of pursuit followed them, boots pounding, shouts growing louder. The river flashed beside them like a silver snake under the moonlight. Finally, they reached the rocky cliffs. The leader pointed to a dark opening ahead. "There!" They squeezed through the narrow entrance, breathing hard, listening to the men outside. The humans shouted, but the echo of the cave confused them. The group stayed still, not daring to breathe. The boy's hands were shaking. The leader placed a hand on his shoulder again. "Quiet," he whispered. After what felt like forever, the footsteps began to fade. The group stayed hidden until the forest was silent once more. When they finally dared to move, the leader looked out at the moonlit world beyond the cave. They had escaped again, but at a cost. Each time they survived, the distance between who they were and who they had to become grew larger. The boy whispered softly, "Will this ever end?" The leader didn't answer right away. He looked at the stars through the crack in the rocks, then said, "Maybe not soon. But every step forward means we're still alive, and that's something they can't take from us." Outside, the night stretched endlessly, full of danger and uncertainty. Yet somewhere beyond that darkness, hope still flickered, small, stubborn, and alive, like the flame that had once kept them warm in the forest. The next morning began with a strange quietness. The air was cold, and mist rolled slowly over the rocks outside the cave. The group had barely slept, their bodies aching from running and fear. The boy woke first. His eyes scanned the gray light filtering in through the cave's opening. The forest looked peaceful again, but he knew peace was often just a disguise for danger. He listened carefully, no dogs, no footsteps, no shouting. Only the sound of the river somewhere below. The leader stirred soon after, stretching his sore arms. His clothes were still damp from the rain, and his face was drawn with exhaustion. Yet there was a small flicker of determination in his eyes. They had survived another night, and that meant something. He stood at the mouth of the cave, looking down at the valley below. It stretched endlessly. Fields, smoke from distant chimneys, and beyond that, the faint shimmer of the border they could never return to. The older woman joined him quietly. "We can't keep running forever," she said softly. "Sooner or later they'll find us again." The leader nodded. "Then we need to find a place they can't reach. A place where we can live even if we have to hide." The boy came closer, his voice hesitant. "Do you think there's such a place?" The leader looked at him and gave a tired smile. "If it doesn't exist, we'll make it." They packed what little they had left and began to move again once the sun climbed higher. The forest gave way to hills and the air grew colder. The journey was slow. Their feet were blistered and hunger gnawed at them. Every step felt like a battle against their bodies. Still, they pushed forward. They had come too far to give up now. By noon, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Smoke rose from small cottages far below, another human settlement. The boy's heart skipped a beat. "Maybe these people are different," he said hopefully. "Maybe they'll listen." The leader didn't answer right away. He had learned not to trust hope too easily. Yet something about this place looked calmer. The fields were open, green, and full of life. It didn't carry the same heavy air of fear as the last village. Perhaps this was their chance. They decided to wait until dusk before approaching. The older woman gathered dry grass and herbs to make a small fire, while the boy went down to the stream to drink. For the first time in many days, they allowed themselves to rest. The leader sat quietly, staring at the valley. His mind wandered back to home, the forests that had once been green, the laughter of his people, the songs that echoed through the hills. All gone now, buried under dust and silence. When evening came, the group began walking toward the village. They stayed near the shadows, careful not to draw attention. As they reached the edge of the fields, they saw farmers returning home, carrying tools and baskets. A gentle smell of bread filled the air. It felt almost unreal after so many nights of hunger and fear. They approached a small house with warm light spilling through the windows. The leader stepped forward first and knocked gently on the door. There was a pause, then slow footsteps. The door creaked open and a woman appeared. She looked surprised, then cautious. "Who are you?" she asked. The leader bowed his head slightly. "We mean no harm," he said. "We've traveled far and need shelter for the night." The woman studied them. Her eyes softened when she saw their tired faces, the mud on their clothes, the fear hidden behind their silence. Something in her heart stirred, perhaps pity, perhaps recognition. She opened the door wider. "Come in before someone sees you." The warmth of the small house wrapped around them like a blanket. A fire crackled in the corner. The smell of soup made the boy's stomach twist with longing. The woman motioned for them to sit. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," she said. They ate slowly, almost afraid the food might vanish if they rushed. The woman didn't ask too many questions. But the leader could tell she knew they weren't from her world. Still, she didn't seem afraid. After they finished eating, she said softly, "You crossed the border, didn't you?" The leader hesitated, then nodded. Yes. She didn't react with anger or shock, only a quiet sigh. "You're brave," she said, "or desperate." "Maybe both." The older woman lowered her eyes. "We just wanted a chance to live." The woman looked at her for a long moment. "You're not the first to come here," she whispered. "Some passed through months ago. They were hunted too. I helped them reach the mountains. No one goes there, it's too cold, too high. That's why it's safe." The leader's heart beat faster. "Can you show us the way?" The woman nodded slowly. "You'll have to leave before dawn. If anyone sees you, I can't protect you. But if you follow the northern path and cross the frozen river, you'll find an old trail. It leads to the mountain caves." Hope returned to their eyes like light after a storm. They thanked her deeply, though words felt too small to carry their gratitude. That night, they slept on the floor near the fire. It was the first real sleep they'd had in weeks. The warmth, the quiet crackle of flames, it almost felt like home. Before dawn, the woman woke them. The world outside was still dark and cold. She handed them a small bundle of food and a wool blanket. "Go quickly," she said. "Follow the stars north until you reach the river. After that, the trail will guide you." The boy looked at her and whispered, "Why are you helping us?" She smiled faintly. "Because once my family needed help too. Someone showed us kindness when no one else would. I'm just returning what I owe." The group left quietly, moving through the mist. The village faded behind them as the first light of morning touched the sky. They followed the path as the woman had said, their steps light but hearts full. The air grew colder with every mile, the ground harder, and soon snow began to fall. By the time they reached the river, it was half frozen, shimmering like glass. Crossing it was risky, but they had no other choice. The leader tested the ice carefully, then led them across one by one. The boy slipped once, catching himself just in time. When they finally reached the other side, the relief was overwhelming. Ahead, the mountains rose tall and silent, their peaks lost in clouds. It was a hard climb, but the promise of safety gave them strength. They moved slowly, their breath turning to white mist in the air. The higher they went, the quieter the world became. It felt as if they had left behind everything human: war, hate, fear, and entered a place untouched by time. By dusk, they found what the woman had described: a cluster of caves hidden behind thick ice and stone. They stepped inside, lighting a small fire with the dry branches they'd carried. The warmth filled the small space. They looked at one another, too tired to speak, but their faces showed the same thought. They had finally found a place to rest. Outside, snow began to fall heavier, covering their footprints. The world below was silent. The leader sat near the fire, watching the flames flicker. "We made it," he said softly. "We're safe now." The boy looked at the entrance of the cave where the wind howled like a whisper. "Do you think anyone will find us here?" "Maybe someday," the leader said. "But if they do, maybe the world will be different by then. Maybe they'll see we're not enemies." The older woman smiled faintly. "Then all this running will have meant something." The fire burned low, painting soft light on their tired faces. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the mountains in silence. For the first time since they crossed the border, they weren't afraid. They had survived hunger, fear, and the darkness of human cruelty, and still carried a small flame of hope inside them. Far below, in the village they had left behind, the kind woman stood at her door, looking toward the mountains. She smiled softly, whispering a wish for their safety. Somewhere deep in her heart, she hoped that someday both sides of the border would remember what it meant to be human. Up in the caves, the group huddled together as the night grew colder. The fire dimmed, but their hearts stayed warm. They didn't know what the future would bring: peace, discovery, or more struggle. But they knew one thing for sure. They had crossed into a world that feared them, yet found pieces of kindness that proved not all hearts were closed. And though they were far from home, they realized something beautiful. Sometimes survival isn't just about escaping death. It's about finding reasons to live, even in a place where the world tells you not to.